Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free to play here on Magic the Gathering Real Life. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. So, we're looking at colorless cards today in defense of Veldmar. And this is an interesting section. I introduced two new factions that were invading the plane, which brought the total number of factions up to 9. Now this starts to run into the kind of problems that Ravnica has, where you have to decide if some of the guilds appear in one set or some appear in the next set. They all appear in this set. So something you're going to notice about these cards is that just about all of them produce quintessence tokens. The sets in a block are meant to be drafted together, so I had to make sure that in this set and the next one, that these colorless cards produced a lot of quintessence because the first set didn't make any. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Coruscating Pulse. So this is colorless and 1 sorcery. It's an uncommon. At the beginning of your first upkeep, if one or more cards named Coruscating Pulse are in your sideboard, you may reveal one of them and exile a card from your hand. If you do, put the revealed card from your sideboard into your hand. So this doesn't affect your mulligan, but it kind of effectively does. It's just that it happens in play on your first upkeep. So the idea with this card, well, let's go ahead and read what it actually does. You gain 2 life, surveil 1, then create a quintessence token. And a quintessence token is a colorless enchantment token named Quintessence that has sacrifice this enchantment at colorless, and pay 2 generic, sacrifice this enchantment, draw a card. Simultaneously, kind of like a clue and kind of like a treasure token that only makes colorless, and it's an enchantment, not an artifact. So the basic idea with this card, you know, if you draft it and run it in your deck, it'll smooth out the early turns a bit for you. You know, with a surveil, and then you can get ahead on mana, or you can draw a card off the quintessence token. And you can, like, find your land drops, or find more spells that way. But also, pulling it in from the sideboard and exiling a card from your hand means that if you have an iffy starting hand that has one too many lands in it, you can exile, like, one of those lands and pull this in, and now you've got a reasonable turn 2 play. It's not amazing, but it's an option, and it's a decent option. In draft, I would rate this card actually pretty highly because you can always just draft it as a sideboard card and use it from the sideboard. So, because of that added flexibility, I would say that this card's a pretty high pick. You know, like let's say a 3, right? That's normally a card that would always make the cut into your deck. In this case, it always makes the cut into your sideboard, unless for some reason you just don't have any lands that produce colorless. Illithid Collector. This is colorless and 2. Creature Horror Scout. It's a common. 3/2. When this enters the battlefield, target opponent banishes 1, then you create a quintessence token. So this one's pretty straightforward. It's just a little common guy. So it can get you ahead on mana, it can get you ahead on cards, and it can also empower other cards that want quintessence. So you can just stockpile it for a while until you get a payoff card. However you want to use the quintessence, it's going to be pretty good. So since you're getting all of that attached to a 3 power body for 3, it's a pretty reasonable card all the way around. You know, I'd say this guy is like a 2.5, and it should be easier to splash into colorless than to most colors. Illithid Gatherer. This is colorless and 1. It's a 1/4 creature horror wizard. It is a common. Has pay 4 and tap. Target opponent banishes 1, then you create a quintessence token. So this is a late game mana sink It's also, early game, a very good blocker. And a very good blocker that can go into a wide variety of decks. Because it's much easier to splash into colorless. You know, some of the multicolor producing lands of the set will have a mode where they just make colorless mana. So this should be pretty easy to cast. A 1/4 for 2 is actually a pretty relevant stat line, and it gives you something to do with your mana through the late game. So, not a bad card all the way around. I think I'll give this guy probably like a 2.5. Invasion of Dreams. So this is the last of our battle cards. So this is Thune's Invasion here. It's a colorless and 1, a battle siege, like the battles from March of the Machine. It comes with 3 defense. It's an uncommon. Your opponent will defend it as if they had a planeswalker. And when this enters, create a 1/1 colorless nightmare creature token and a quintessence token. Then each opponent banishes 1. So this is like an early 2-drop that kind of smooths out the game for you a little bit. The opponent's banishing is kind of like a minor sub-theme of the Thune cards. They're not as dedicated to it as the Pax Dread, but they can supplement each other. And if you have enough of this faction in your deck, then you could be a dedicated mill deck. But it gives you a little creature, gives you quintessence. Just helpful all the way around, and it's not too hard to flip this. And if you do, you get Nightmares Unleashed. So, Nightmares Unleashed is an enchantment. It's colorless. Horrors and nightmares you control get +1/+0 and ward 1. Sacrifice a quintessence token, target opponent banishes 1, then you create a 1/1 colorless nightmare creature token. So, this gives you a totally different use for your quintessence, where you can use it to mill out the opponent and to go wide. And going wide in this case, if they don't blow up this enchantment, the token you're getting is actually a 2/1 with ward. So, it's pretty good. You know, if you've been stockpiling quintessence and you got like 5 quintessence tokens, and then you get Nightmares Unleashed, then you can trade those in to, you know, mill out the opponent 5 cards into exile and get 10 power on the board. So, it looks a little subtle, but for its mana cost, it's very efficient and it gives you kind of an alternate way to win. I think this is pretty strong, and I would give this card a good solid 3. Manifested Hunger. This is a colorless and 3. It is a creature nightmare horror. It's a rare. It's a star. When you cast this, you create 2 quintessence tokens. It has lifelink and vigilance. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of quintessence tokens you control. And when it dies, each opponent banishes 4. So this is another way you can use quintessence tokens. There's a couple of creatures that can go tall rather than wide in the faction. So even if that doesn't end up being the way your strategy plays out, making 2 quintessence tokens means it could, you know, ramp you, it could draw you 2 cards. It's a good effect either way. So, it gets you a body on the field, it gets you ahead on cards, and it could be a win condition unto itself. So, just from the fact it makes 2 quintessence tokens, I think I would easily rate this like a 3.5. I think it's pretty good. Manifested Nightmare. This is 2 colorless and 3 generic. Nightmare Horror. It's an uncommon star. When you cast Manifested Nightmare, create 2 quintessence tokens. As Flying Menace and Ward, banish 3. So That player would have to exile the top 3 cards of their library to target it. And its power and toughness are equal to the number of quintessence tokens you control. So this one is more expensive and harder to cast than the rare we just looked at. Like the rare, it makes 2 quintessence tokens. It costs double colorless. And it's just a little bit harder to use. Just a bit more awkward. All of that being said, I still think the card is pretty good, and I still give it a 2.5. For a dedicated quintessence deck, I'd say that its stock rises, probably up to a 3 at least. Nightmare of Thune. This is 1 colorless, as a rare Nightmare Horror. Whenever this deals damage to a creature, tap that creature and put 2 stun counters on it. You can also pay a colorless and 4, and return Nightmare of Thune from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. It's a 1/1 Nightmare Horror. So, this is a recurring threat that instead of having Death Touch, it's got like a Stun Touch. Where if the other creature survives combat, gets locked down, and then this can come back from the graveyard again to keep pressuring the opponent, or giving you a blocker. It comes back tapped, but once you untap it, it can serve kind of the same function as Death Touch does, offensively or defensively. So, because it can keep coming back from the graveyard, I think this card is actually pretty strong. Maybe stronger than it looks. Although it does look pretty spooky in the art. I would give this card... Gosh, it's a little hard to rate, just being a 1-drop. I think it's at least a 3.5, and it could be a 4. I think it's deceptively strong. Pierce Perception. This is 1 colorless. It's an instant. It's common. It deals 1 damage to any target, and then you surveil 2. So this is useful. You can always get a surveil 2 when you use this, so you're getting pretty good card selection, and you can be stalking the graveyard at the same time. Plus, if the opponent has a relevant thing to hit with the damage, then you get to take out one of their little creatures or tokens in exchange. And battles are in the set as well, and sometimes a battle will annoyingly have 1 defense left on it, and you could finish it off. There's just a lot of ways to use this card, and there are some interesting 1 toughness targets in the limited format. So I think the card already looks pretty good. Is maybe slightly better than it looks already. I think this card's around a 3. There's like a upper limit on how many copies you want in the deck, but I think the first copy or 2 is like a 3. Puppet Master of Thune. This is 2 colorless mana. It's an Eldrazi Nightmare. It's a rare, it's a 2/2. Has Menace and Vigilance. When Puppet Master of Thune enters the battlefield, create a quintessence token. When Puppet Master of Thune dies, you gain control of target non-land permanent and opponent controls with mana cost equal to or less than the number of quintessence tokens you control. So, you get a pretty efficiently statted 2-drop. It requires 2 colorless mana, which is a little bit of a hoop to jump through, but not as much as 2 colored pips would be. It replaces itself with a quintessence token, or ramps you. And on top of all of that, if you can stockpile quintessence, you get to steal something of theirs when your 2-drop dies. I think this card is actually quite strong. It might be stronger in Constructed than Limited, but I think it's going to be good in Limited too. So all of that being said, I think this card might sneakily be a 4. It's especially true if you can actually hit it on turn 2 with the 2 colorless. If it's harder for your deck to cast, then, its value is going to decrease. Quintessence Amplifier. This is a colorless and 2 for an Eldrazi Nightmare. It's a 3/3. It's a rare. It has reach. When the amplifier enters the battlefield, you gain life equals the number of quintessence tokens you control. Whenever you sacrifice a quintessence token, you gain 1 life and target opponent banishes 1. So this pays you back with life for your quintessence. It also is helping to amp up the mill strategy. So some of the other cards we looked at give you alternate ways to go tall or to go wide with your board. This one doubles down on stalling the game and winning through milling. So there are different ways to approach how you're going to win the game in the Thune colorless faction. But this card is great all the way around. It's 3/3 with reach. It synergizes with your quintessence. If you're in the right deck, to where this is going to be a good payoff card for you, then I think you rate it pretty highly at that point. If you're in that deck, I think you rate this like a 4. If you're not in that deck, then this is a much more forgettable kind of filler level card, and I'd call it like a 2. Thune Advocate. This is a colorless and 3. We have a creature horror cleric. It's a common. It's a 3/4 with reach. When it enters the battlefield, tap up to 1 target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Then you create a quintessence token. This creature is fantastic. This is incredibly powerful. So you would probably play this as a decently statted 4-drop with reach that tapped things and stunned them if it didn't make quintessence. But it does. So you get all the benefits of quintessence on top of this very playable creature otherwise. The combination of that tempo play removal aspect coupled with the quintessence really pushes this card over the top, and I think it's going to be one of the better commons of the set, frankly. So I think it is not unreasonable to rate this card a 4 because it should be easier to cast with a colorless pip than it would be with a normal colored pip of mana. So yeah, I'm going with a 4. Thune Figment. This is a colorless and 1. It is an illusion nightmare. It's a 2/1 uncommon. It has vigilance and ward banish 1. When Thune Figment dies, create a quintessence token. So this one doesn't give you the quintessence right away. It does have a couple of keywords, but its stat line is pretty forgettable. Overall, this is a playable card. If you're in the quintessence deck, it's probably going to make the cut, like a 2.5. If you're not in the quintessence deck, it's still fine. Maybe rating a little bit more like a 2. I do think its stock would rise if you're in the Aristocrats deck, the Nulvir cult. That's white, black, green. So I would say if you're in Quintessence or the Nulvir, you might rate this like a 2.5 at least. Thune's Dream Warper. This is 8 mana, all generic. The creature Eldrazi Nightmare is an 8/8 rare. When you cast this spell, look at target opponent's hand and the top 4 cards of their library. You may exile any number of those cards, then put any remaining cards from the library back on top of it in any order. For each card exiled this way, that opponent draws a card. This has Annihilator 1 and Vigilance. Just as a reminder, Annihilator 1 means whenever this creature attacks, defending player sacrifices 1 permanent. So Thune doesn't work with traditional Eldrazi manifestations like the other Titans do. So, aside from the card that represents Thune, this is the only traditional looking Eldrazi. That's part of Thune's faction. So these are like the right hands of Thune here, or tentacles. And otherwise, Thune likes to employ mind control and smaller Eldrazi and Illithids and other things he can control the minds of. It, I should say. So Thune likes to work through proxies. Thune likes to manipulate others. So an invasion by Thune is not the same as an invasion by the other Eldrazi Titans. That being said, this is an interesting card. So you can't put the opponent down on cards, and in fact, if you exile some from the top of their library, you may put them up on cards. But if you're careful with how many cards you choose, you can stack the top of their deck and pick what they will be drawing when you replace those cards and what they will be drawing for the next couple of turns. So there's a multitude of ways to use that to your advantage. You can use it for information and to stack their deck the wrong way. You could also force them to draw a lot of cards. If you exile their whole hand and the top 4 of their library, if you're going for a mill win, that could mill them out all in one go. This could be your finisher at 8 mana, but not for the reason of combat. So sneakily, it can actually serve either function. The mill win or, a traditional combat win. Either way, I think this card is strong. Not every deck can get to 8 mana, but if you've been piling up a bunch of Quintessence, it can sacrifice to make mana. And you could definitely be casting this. So I think I'm going to give this card... It's between like a 3.5 and a 4. I'm inclined to give it a 4. I think it's sneakily quite good. Thune, the Mind Unraveled. 11 mana. Legendary creature, Eldrazi Nightmare. It is a 13/13 mythic rare. When you cast this spell, gain control of 2 target permanents. Annihilator 3, Menace, Reach, Ward, Banish 11. That would be, you have to exile the top 11 cards of your library. Whenever an opponent would draw a card, instead you banish 1. That player may play the exiled card for as long as it remains exiled. So your opponents don't draw cards off their library anymore. Now they draw cards off of your library. So they don't get to see their own cards anymore. They have to play with whatever you brought. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent banishes 2. You may play cards exiled this way for as long as they remain exiled. They don't get to play with their cards anymore. You do. They have to play with your cards. That should benefit you because they had a game plan in mind and an end game they were building towards. They know what's in their library. They may not have access to your colors immediately. They might have to play some of your lands first. They don't know what's in your deck, and you've thrown them off of their game plan. At the same time, having Thune is a massive swing in the game, right? You just took 2 of their permanents, and you're drawing like an additional 2 cards from their deck every turn. If you resolve this in limited, I'm pretty sure you win the game. It's not absolutely guaranteed, but you win the game. Could definitely have constructed applications too. So, in terms of limited, because the mana cost is so high, I don't think I can give it a 5. even though every deck can technically play it, not every deck is suitable to getting 11 mana or reanimating this from the graveyard. So, if you can use this card, if you think you can get to 11 mana or otherwise get this on the field, then I think it is a 5 in that case. But otherwise, you probably can't play it. Because you'll never reach the point in the game where you have 11 mana. So if you have Quintessence, that piles up as extra mana. If you produce Treasure, or you're ramping in like the Ulthrak deck, where they have a bunch of mana producers and they care about creatures that cost 6 or more, this is a creature that costs 6 or more. So there are decks that can make use of Thune, and then there are decks that probably can't. So this one kind of flips back and forth between being like a 0.5 and a 5. Unfeeling Efficiency. This is 2 colorless pips. It is an uncommon instant. Choose one. Destroy target multicolored permanent. Tap target permanent and put 2 stun counters on it. Or create a Quintessence token. So this is one of the removal spells for Thune. There are some very good multicolored permanents in the format, so there are live targets for that. Obviously, tapping something and putting 2 stun counters on it is fine. It's not exactly removal, but it's not bad. And making a Quintessence token is, you're kind of like cycling the card. You don't get the card right away, but you could use it for mana instead. So, all of the modes on this card have play to them, and I think this card basically always makes the cut as long as you can produce 2 colorless. So, I'd call it like a 3.5 if you can cast it relatively easily. And if you can't cast it very easily, then it's not going to be very good for you, and it'll be like, I don't know, a 1 or something. And Warping Harvest. This is a colorless and 3. We have a common instant. Target creature gets +5/-5 until end of turn. Create a Quintessence token. So this is a kill spell. I think it would be exceedingly rare to use it as a power pump. That technically it's possible. And there are creatures that have more than 5 toughness in the set, so it could happen, but 19 times out of 20, I think this spell is going to be removal. And it's a removal spell that replaces itself with a card from the Quintessence. But if you're in the Quintessence deck, maybe you're making your tall creatures taller. Maybe you're sacking it to make a Nightmare token. There's other possibilities in the Quintessence deck for what that means. So this is a pretty great card since it's replacing itself with a Quintessence token. And I think most decks in the format are going to have a reasonably easy time to splash into this. So this card might be as good as a 3 no matter who you are. Because most of the multicolor decks are going to have some amount of access to colorless in their mana-fixing lands. And that wraps it up for colorless cards that are not artifacts. So next time we'll be looking at artifacts and then finally lands. So stay tuned to the channel for all of that. If you've been liking the content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Checking out my other videos helps the channel a lot. And until next time, never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.